We move on to the trial of Jesus. I won't be looking at the trial of Jesus in a lot of detail. His trial before the Sanhedrin in detail. I just want to highlight a couple of aspects of it that we pick up here. So he gets taken to the house of Caiaphas, the chief priest, where the teachers of the law and them have gathered. In other words, they know what is happening and they've all got together. The elders, the teachers of the law, they've all got together. They know Jesus is about to be arrested. They know he's about to be brought before them. It's all part of the whole scenario to show how things are pre-planned. And Peter follows at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest's house. And he goes and sits down with the guards to see how it would all come right. So the scene goes into what's happening inside the chief priest's house, or wherever it was that they took him, and how the trial is kind of happening. And they try to find false evidence to Jesus to put against him, but they can't find any until many people came forward, until lies about him, until finally two men come together. In other words, a lot of people say a lot of things, but they can't use it. Until a man comes forward and says, man said, I'm able to tear down God's temple and 3 days build it back up. And the high priest got, they really get excited about this. And they challenge Jesus. But Jesus keeps quiet. Again, the high priest says to him, you're under oath. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. In other words, tell us if you are the promised Messiah. And Jesus doesn't answer. He says, so you say I said it. And he tells him, he says, from this time on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right-hand side of the mighty and coming from the clouds of heaven. And they consider it blasphemy. I'm not sure I understand that. And the people will say he must die. The Sanhedrin says he's guilty and must die, and they spit in him, and they prophesy, and they mock him. As we look at this section with the trial, much of what happens is the fulfillment of prophecy. And we have to understand it in that light. There are also other aspects to the trial and judgment that are important to understand. The response of the religious leaders highlights the very essence of the conflict between God and his ways and the ways of the people of this world, and the ways that will seek to eliminate that which is a threat to his power, their power bases. And so the trial is not about anything that Jesus did or even taught in terms of Judaism and Scripture, or even his interpretation of Scripture and the law. None of the religious leaders or teachers of the law could have or would have had a problem with his teachings or interpretation of the law and Scripture. The real issue is him being a threat to the ecclesial and political power base. And that is because of who he claimed he was. And so the trial about Jesus is not about what he said or taught, but about who he was. And we need to understand this through quite a few different perspectives. First, religious leaders, through their legalistic approach to the faith of Moses, limited and reduced a dynamic personal relationship with God to a series of laws and ceremonial regulations. They projected an exceptionally negative understanding of human nature about all people. Jesus, in terms of who he was as a human, had a love and compassion and understanding of the essence of who people most truly were. He knew they were not mere irredeemable sinners intent on evil, but people with feelings and hopes and dreams and love and capable of rising to the best of their human potential if given just half the chance to do so. But the religious leaders deny the value and good of people's most basic humanity. What is most true in all people? They saw them as just sinners. In offense, Jesus' way with those they considered to be irredeemable sinners is what they found offensive. And they sought to maintain the status quo. All religions do that. All denominations do that, in fact. It serves their interests. They naturally rejected that which was challenged and contradicted deliberate and self-serving reduction of all religions and the law of Moses. Much as they claimed to honor and serve God the way of Moses, they would inevitably reject that which opposed their understanding of either. Who Jesus was and what he stood for untaught was an open and public affront to the reduction of the law of Moses, as by the Pharisees. Jesus' approach and response to the religious leaders and the teachers of the law in his trial was not exactly a passive one. It's an active one. He constantly challenges their approach during the trial in the public era. In fact, there are times even before he creates a space for that to happen. And so when we come to Jesus' response, I'm certain that Jesus was fully aware not only of the need to challenge the Pharisees and teachers of the law, but the need for him to deliberately create a space and responses needed to enable what had to happen and had been predicted. Jesus is creating what is necessary to happen to bring about the fullness of scriptural prophecy about his betrayal and death. Deliberately doing it. Another aspect of the trial and judgment that was inevitable. Given that Jesus was the promised Messiah and the Son of God, is that who he was most deep within his being would be rejected by the religious institutions and powers as a threat to their legitimacy of their religious claims and power bases. We can understand that. Then we need to look at the role of Caiaphas and both the anti-Caiaphas party in the Sanhedrin and the role of the people of Nicodemus. The high priest and the chair of the Sanhedrin, Caiaphas, was a position of significant power and authority. Presided over all legal proceedings and religious matters. He organized a trial of Jesus, successfully accusing him of blasphemy. His primary concern was in fact not what was right or wrong, but maintaining order and prevent any uprising that could provoke Roman intervention. There was, however, in the Sanhedrin a faction known as the anti-Caiaphas party, who may have held different views on the appropriate course of action, particularly with regard to Jesus. Some members of the Sanhedrin, like Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, were open to Jesus' teaching. We refer to the anti-Caiaphas party. They may have held different views from Caiaphas on the trial, the ultimate fate of Jesus. We won't ever know for sure. But it's probable that Caiaphas' decision to hand over Jesus was not unanimous, that people opposed it. In fact, later on, the Pharisee Gamaliel, when Peter and the apostles were brought before the Sanhedrin, long later, it's Gamaliel who stands up and defends them, demonstrating that there are different perspectives within the Sanhedrin. The decision to have Jesus executed was not unanimous. There was discontent. There were those who opposed it. Caiaphas was not alone in his decision. There were those who did not agree. So it wasn't unanimous. But there was certainly enough agreement to do it, to overwhelm those who opposed it. And then we find this amazing story. The scene is happening in the trial of Jesus, but there's another story outside that we all, I think, have negative, but I think it's an incredibly positive story. The story of Peter's denial of Jesus. Peter's sitting outside in the courtyard, and one of the women comes in and say, "You too were with Jesus of Galilee." And Jesus denies it. "I don't know what you're talking about." He goes out to the entrance of the courtyard. Another servant woman comes to him and says to the men there, "He was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Jesus denies it. "I swear I don't know that man." Another man comes and says, "Of course you're one of them." After all, the way you speak gives you away. I think that's fascinating. And Peter says, "I swear I'm telling the truth. May God punish me. I do not know that man." And then a rooster crows. And Peter remembers what Jesus said. That before the rooster crows, he will have denied him 3 times. And he goes out and he weeps. The question is, why does Matthew make this part of the story of his gospel? The first aspect I find striking is not so much Peter's denial of having known Jesus as his being in the courtyard in the first place. The courtyard where the trial was taking place, that he was in the first place. Bit of background, in Palestine, the houses of the well-to-do were built with a hollow square around an open courtyard in which there were various rooms opened. So it's nothing unusual for Jesus to be brought before the high priest for questioning at his home, particularly given the time and day in which the events were leading to his betrayal had taken place. Nothing unusual about that at all. But what is interesting about this story is that Peter could have run away from Jesus and those who came to arrest him in the place where he's being tried. But he doesn't do so. We don't read of other disciples being there. Somebody close to Jesus must have been there to witness the scene. But why was Peter there? And why was he alone? And where were the other disciples? Peter's presence here faces me with a very simple question. Did Peter alone have the courage to be outside the place where Jesus was being tried? And although Peter later denied knowing him, had the others fled? If so, it's Peter's courage that I admire. The guts for him to stand in the courtyard. When we look at Peter's denial of having known Jesus, the fact that he was the only person, the only disciple with the heroic courage to have been in the courtyard in the first place. All the rest had run away. His denial has to be seen in the light of the failure of courage of the rest. He is the only one with courage. And the funny thing is this, after having been recognized, we don't read of Peter running away. He shows no intention of leaving the courtyard. His accent gives him away. I find that fascinating. From his speech, he was clear as a Galilean. The Galilean spoke with such a different and even hard on the hearing accent that no Galilean was allowed to pronounce a benediction in the synagogue service. So they just spoke too badly. Their accent was just appalling. I suspect that behind Peter's tremendous courage that placed him in the courtyard, when the other disciples sought refuge elsewhere, was a great love. It was an incredible love for Jesus which gave Peter the courage which riveted him there in the first place, in spite of the fact he'd been recognized 3 times. This story is about love, and the courage that comes from love. I find Matthew including this story remarkable. And there that I find its deepest meaning. I've said a few times in the study that Matthew is writing this account of Jesus' life to Christians who were Jews in the area around Lake Galilee. They were being persecuted by the Jews to the point where some of them had to seek accommodation in the caves in very steep cliffs around the sea. Some of these caves had been discovered. And there's evidence not only of them being habituated over a longer period of time by people, but there are Christian symbols, crosses, and signs of fish on the walls, engraved on their walls. The story of Peter in the courtyard of the high priest would have given them an example of a Christian courage, would have reminded them that there will be times when their witness would fail them, or when their words and example would have denied perhaps them knowing Christ. Above all else, it would have reminded them that their failure is never the end of the story. Later on we read of Peter's restoration, but this is about the story of immense courage. And so early in the morning, let me just make a check here on my time factor. I think I'm going to call it quits here before we look at chapter 27. So let's call it off here. Thank you.